Okay, welcome to section 2.5, which is deceptive and misleading numbers. So deceptive and misleading numbers. Leading numbers. Okay. So first we're going to address ever-changing reference numbers. So ever-changing reference numbers. Numbers. Okay. Okay, so here's a warning. And it's something we have to be very careful about. So you must not add. So you must not add percentages if compounding. Add percentages if compounding. So what does that mean? Compounding. Well, let's see. So for example, so suppose the number of Tesla owners, so suppose the number of Tesla owners, increased 30%. So increased 30% in 1 year. And then 40% in the next. And then 40% in the next. So what I'm going to ask you, what was the overall increase in percentage over that 2-year period? So what was the overall? What was the overall increase in Tesla owners over that 2-year period? And you might say, well, that's easy. It's 70%, 30 1 year and 40 the next. And that's where we are wrong. This is what it means to not add percentages. So let's show why that's not true. So we don't know how many owners there were initially, which is good. So we can assume or suppose the initial amount of Tesla owners, is equal to 100. Because if it's 100, it's very easy to do a percentage of 100. So let me move this back a bit. So if we assume that, then the first year increase, so the first year increase well, that's going to be, let's see. So it increased 30% in 1 year. So it's 30% of the initial amount. Well, since it's 100, this is nice because 30% really means 30 over 100. And if I multiply that by 100, I get 30. So the increase, there were 30 more Tesla owners the next year. So what is the end of first year? End of first year. Tesla owners. Well, it's going to be the 100 we began with, and the 30 we added that year. So at the end of the first year, there's now 130 Tesla owners. So now let's analyze the second year. So the, how do I want to do this? The second year increase. So second year increase is what? Well, the second year, the increase in ownership was 40% in the next, right? So 40% the next year. So 40% of the final amount in the previous year, which is 130. So this is now 40% over 100 times 130. So I can cross cancel one of the zeros from the 130 and one of the zeros from the 40. And I'm left with 4 times 13. So remember, 4 times 10 is 40, and 4 times 3 is 12. So I'm left with 52. So my second year increase is 52. So what that means is end of second year Tesla owners. So end of second year Tesla owners. Tesla owners. Well, it's going to be what I began with, which was 130 at the beginning of the year. And we had an increase of 40%. That is 52 owners. So that's 182. Okay, so I went from 100 initially to 182. So that means that my relative change was what? So what was the overall increase in Tesla owners? So the overall increase is going to be 82, right? So overall increase by percentage. Well, that's going to be the absolute increase, which is final amount minus starting amount, which we're then going to divide by starting amount. So the final amount was 182 Teslas. I began with 100 Teslas, and I'm going to divide by 100 Teslas. So 182 minus 100 gives me 82 divided by 100, so percent. So this is an increase of 82%. So that's not the same as 70. So 30 plus 40 was 70%, but it was an actual increase over the 2-year period of 82%. So we have to be very careful when we're doing these problems to make sure we don't make a mistake. So now I'm going to deal with percentages of percentages. Let's see if I have, draw this in dark blue. So percentages of percentages. Remember, this section is titled Misleading Numbers for a reason. Okay, so let's note. So remember, when calculating the absolute versus relative change, what was the difference? So when calculating the absolute change, the absolute change of two percentages, we use the terminology percentage points. So we use the terminology percentage points. And I'm sure that's not where I should have hyphenated that word, but hopefully you understand. So percentage points. So for example, so if the mortality rate has decreased, from 15% to 10% over the last decade, then number one, the absolute change is well, let's see, that's going to be the absolute value of the final percentage minus the initial percentage. So the final percentage was what? Was 10% mortality rate. So 10%. And the initial percentage was 15%. Oops. So in absolute value, let me keep the absolute values here. This is going to be minus 5% inside the absolute value symbols. Remember, that's a distance, so it has to be positive. So it's going to be 5%. And this is called 5 percentage points because it's the absolute change. Percentage points. Okay, so now let's look at the relative change. The relative change, which just divides the absolute change by the initial change. Okay, so this is going to take the absolute change. Oops, what's going on there? So the absolute change, which we have here, so that's 10% minus 15% in absolute values. And we're going to divide that by the original percentage, which is 10%. Sorry, was it 15%? What am I saying? The starting value, 15%. Okay, so what we have then is the 5% that we got from the above, and we're going to divide that by the starting percentage, 15%. So now my percentage symbols can reduce, and 5 goes into 15 3 times. So this is 1/3. So we reduced the mortality by 1/3, i.e. mortality reduced by a third. Reduced by a third. Well, that's a lot. 5 percentage points doesn't really convey the fact that the mortality rate has dropped by a third. Okay, so I think I'm going to see you in the next section then.